In one of our previous classes, we have seen that any part of a sentence which can be divided into a subject and a predicate is a clause. Let's apply that knowledge to the three sentences under consideration. Sentence 1. I sat in the lawn. If you notice, I sat in the lawn is one single clause with subject I and predicate sat in the lawn. Let's turn to sentence 2. I sat in the lawn that faced the river. I sat in the lawn is one clause with subject I and predicate sat in the lawn. That faced the river is the second clause in the sentence with that as the subject and faced the river as the predicate. Let's turn to sentence 3 now. I sat in the lawn while I waited for my turn. I sat in the lawn is one clause with subject I and predicate sat in the lawn. I waited for my turn is another clause with subject I and waited for my turn as predicate. Any sentence which is made up of only one subject and one predicate is said to be a simple sentence. In other words, any sentence which has only one clause is said to be a simple sentence. If both the sentences, sentence 2 and sentence 3 have two clauses each, then what is the difference between the two? When we study both the sentences again, we realize that the clause I sat in the lawn is common to both. So, whatever is the difference, it must be in the second clause. Let's carefully examine the second clause of each sentence carefully. The clause that faced the river in sentence 2 is incomplete in meaning. It is not able to stand by itself. It is dependent on the first clause, I sat in the lawn, for complete meaning. Now, the second clause in sentence 3, I waited for my turn, is complete in meaning. It can stand by itself. It is not dependent on any other clause for complete meaning. What does this mean? Any clause which conveys incomplete meaning and is dependent on another clause for meaning is called a dependent clause or a subordinate clause. And any clause which is complete in itself, which conveys complete meaning, it is not dependent on any other clause for meaning, it can stand by itself, is called an independent clause. So, the clause that faced the river is a dependent clause, and the clause I waited for my turn is an independent clause. So, what new concept do we learn today? A sentence which has two or more independent clauses only is called a compound sentence. So, sentence 3, I sat in the lawn while I waited for my turn is a compound sentence because it is made up of two independent clauses. I sat in the lawn and I waited for my turn. So, it is a compound sentence. Now, let's go to sentence 2. A sentence which has at least one dependent or subordinate clause is called a complex sentence. So, sentence 2 is a complex sentence because I sat in the lawn is an independent clause. That faced the river is a dependent clause. So, the sentence has one independent clause and one dependent clause. That is why it is a complex sentence. Let's take another example. Study the set of 3 sentences carefully. Sentence 1. Margaret has an infection. Margaret is a subject, has an infection is a predicate. So Margaret has an infection is only one clause. That is why sentence 1 is an example of simple sentence. Sentence 2. Margaret has an infection is an independent clause as we have already seen. That is troubling her is the subordinate clause here. Why is it a subordinate clause? That is troubling her. What is troubling her? In order to answer this question, we need to go back to the main clause. Margaret has an infection. So, the clause that is troubling her is dependent on the first clause for complete meaning. So, such a sentence which has one independent clause and one dependent clause is a complex sentence. Sentence 3. Margaret has an infection and it is troubling her. Margaret has an infection is an independent clause because it is not dependent on any other clause for meaning. It is troubling her is also an independent clause. It is not dependent on any other clause for meaning. So, Margaret has an infection and it is troubling her are both independent clauses. That is why the sentence is a compound sentence. Two very important points for us to remember when we deal with types of sentences. Always remember that all independent clauses can be simple sentences. Conversely, all simple sentences are independent clauses. It means any simple sentence that you come across will always be an independent clause. Point 2. When two or more simple sentences, that is independent clauses, are combined with a conjunction, they form compound sentences.